Hi. I know many of you are used to video discs that introduce new products. Well, this video disc is not intended to introduce new trucks, but rather a new way to think about trucks. This is the first of two such programs designed to build your confidence in your ability to understand and sell more light-duty trucks. This program will build a foundation by providing you with basic truck knowledge. The second will introduce you to the Chevy Truck Facts Book and show you how to work with a prospect putting information and a truck together. And speaking of books, make sure you've received your copy of the Truck Basics Workbook that contains the exercises and problems that will help you better understand trucks. But the workbook has even more. There are helpful sections like a glossary of basic truck terms and a truck prospect profile worksheet that you can copy and use with a prospect when speccing out a truck. It'll be a valuable resource while viewing the programs and later in the showroom working with your buyers. During the program, we'll stop occasionally and show you some questions that you'll answer by pressing a button on your touchpad. These questions are just designed to make sure you're getting the most out of the program. So, now that we've gotten some basic business out of the way, we can talk about trucks, or rather, the new way to think about trucks. This new way to think about trucks is based on something called the Truck Knowledge Pyramid. And just like a real pyramid, it has a large, firm base that supports and provides a foundation for a larger number of truck sales. That base is the ability to qualify customers, a skill that many of you have practiced already. So, since interacting with people is the base of this pyramid, what do people use trucks for? This looks like an awful lot of stuff that could get real confusing when you're trying to learn about trucks. And it could be if you have no system for learning. This program has a system to offer that will simplify learning. This stuff isn't so hard to learn when you take it in chunks or levels, letting one build on the one before it, like a pyramid. We're going to call this the Truck Knowledge Pyramid. You can see how it has several levels. We're going to take them one at a time. The broad base is labeled qualifying. It doesn't matter whether you're selling trucks, passenger cars, toasters, or anything else. The first, most basic step is finding out what the prospect wants and needs. And then you've got to match those needs and wants with the features your product offers. That's basically what qualifying is. And knowing how to get prospects to tell you what it takes to sell them is much more important than any math that might be involved in speccing out a truck. The base of the Truck Knowledge Pyramid, then, is gaining knowledge of what the prospect wants. So there's a real good chance you've at least practiced and maybe mastered the hardest part of selling trucks. Sure, there may be some terms that seem unfamiliar at first, and this might make you uncomfortable, but we'll take them a few at a time. It won't be difficult. And just think of all the new terms you've picked up and now use all the time without even thinking about them. Terms like cream puff, up, a walker, B-back, downstroke. Well, now you'll learn truck terms as you're exposed to them and practice using them. And just remember, if you don't get a term, you have the option of stopping this program and going over the segment again. And the glossary in your workbook will explain the terms used here, as well as many more. You'll also learn to simplify the way you think about trucks. For instance, in the opening sequence, how many truck applications did you see? Here it is again. Okay, it was a trick question. There were really only two major uses, moving people and moving cargo. So when you're qualifying your prospects, basically those are your two major considerations. First, finding out how many people the prospect needs to move and matching that with a properly sized vehicle. So that leaves only the second consideration, cargo, as a concern. When you're discussing cargo capabilities, and that includes trailer towing, there are two basic major considerations: weight and size. There are, of course, other considerations like load distribution. That's fine-tuning where the load's going to go. We'll cover that in the next program. So, there's size and weight. Now, qualifying your prospect as to how much area his cargo will occupy is a fairly straightforward matter. You show him the cargo area dimensions and determine which vehicle will best accommodate his load. For the most part, a fairly straightforward process. And when it comes to preparing a more detailed profile of your truck prospect, you're not all on your own, because we're providing you with a truck prospect profile worksheet that you can copy and use for studying as well as a sales aid. As a sales aid, you'll find the checklist useful as a conversation starter and as a way to help the prospect tell you what you need to know in order to sell him the proper truck. Now, certain trucks like the S-Series and the Astro cargo models will have net payloads. That means there's no muss, no fuss when it comes to figuring out how much cargo these trucks can carry. It's listed in black and white. Option weights don't affect it. On certain trucks, especially when dealing with the competition, you'll run into gross payload. What's the difference?
Traditionally, payload, actually gross payload, is the combined weight of the occupants, cargo, and optional equipment. But with S10 came the concept of net payload. That's the combined weight of occupants and cargo only, or what the capacity of the truck really is. This type of rating is easier to understand because the weight of any optional equipment does not take away from the weight of cargo that an S10 can carry. An S10 that is rated to carry 1,625 pounds can carry that weight regardless of how many options are added. But that is not the case with a competition. Take a V6 engine, for example. That extra weight must be deducted from the payload rating of Ford's Ranger. And that's nearly 80 pounds. Take out approximately 64 pounds for an automatic transmission. About another 78 pounds for air conditioning. 38 pounds for a rear step bumper. For power steering, 29 pounds. 32 pounds for top-of-the-line trim. 116 pounds for an auxiliary fuel tank. And on and on. The point is that the payload rating for these competitive trucks is reduced by the weight of each and every option added.
Because vehicles like S10 pickups and Blazers, as well as Astro, offer net payload and other certain fixed capacities, you can find this information spelled out in the Chevy Truck Facts book. We're going to concentrate on the full-size pickups because they offer many more variations. When we talk about torque, rear axle ratios, transmissions, and other variables available on the full-size pickups, the same mechanical principles will also apply to the smaller trucks, so don't feel we're ignoring them. Okay, now we're going to ask the first questions. Just do what it says on the screen, and we'll see how much you've learned already. Now that you've determined what the customer needs a truck for, you've got to match that need with the right model and series. The first thing you and your prospect may want to consider is whether he needs a 4x2 or a 4x4. What do these terms mean? Your school teachers told you that 4 multiplied by 2 equals 8. Well, when it comes to trucks, that's not necessarily true. Instead, these figures stand for chassis types. This figure is read as 4x2. It means the truck has 4 wheels but is only driven by the 2 rear wheels. This figure is read as 4x4. It means this truck has part-time 4-wheel drive, meaning it can be driven by all 4 wheels. So you want to determine which configuration your prospects need. Does their line of work take them off the highway? Do they go into the backwoods to hunt and fish? Do they like the security that 4-wheel drive provides in bad weather areas? These are the sorts of questions that help you and your prospect work together, finding the proper truck for the job. After you've done that, it's time to determine which series your prospect needs. That's easier when you know that each Chevrolet series represents a different level of load-carrying capacity. Not quite as simple to figure as net payload, but fairly easy in its own right. This is where you learn another new term, GVWR. This stands for Gross Vehicle Weight Rating. What's that? Simple. GVWR is a rating assigned to a particular truck. This rating is determined by suspension components and tires. It was established by engineering tests, and it must be adhered to. The gross vehicle weight, or GVW, refers to the weight of the unloaded truck itself, called curb weight, plus the weight of passengers, usually figured to be 150 pounds each, called model weight, plus the weight of all options built into or added to the truck, plus cargo weight. The maximum rated amount of these three weights, the total allowed by Chevrolet for any particular truck, is the load carrying capacity, or gross vehicle weight rating. The 10, 20, and 30 series used to refer to nominal weight ratings called half, three-quarter, and one-ton trucks. If you aren't aware of it, more people will ask for a half, three-quarter, or one-ton truck than will know the series names. So keep in mind that the series are defined by GVWR ranges. And so we have the 10 series pickups with a GVWR range of 4,900 pounds to 6,100 pounds. And when a customer tells you he needs a half-ton truck, this is what he means. The 20 series pickups that have a GVWR range of 6,400 pounds to 8,600 pounds. When prospects refer to a three-quarter ton truck, this is what they mean. The 30 series pickups with a GVWR range of 9,000 pounds to 10,000 pounds. And of course, when they ask to see a one-ton, this is what they're talking about. Those are the three series that Chevrolet offers in full-size pickups. But there's even more variety, because Chevy offers a model with dual rear wheels called Big Dually that's available in the 30 series in either two- or four-wheel drive. The dual rear wheels are what gives a 30 series the maximum rating. Customers would use Big Dually when they needed maximum towing or cargo carrying capacities. For carrying up to 6 passengers, Chevy offers a crew cab model. And for prospects who need more than 50 cubic feet of interior lockable cargo room, there's the bonus cab model. Basically, a crew cab without seats. Now it's time to answer a few more questions, this time on the material we've just covered. So you can see that just by asking a prospect about how heavy a load do you expect to carry, you've narrowed down the choice considerably and gone a great distance in determining the best vehicle for that prospect. Chevy full-size pickups are built tough to handle serious loads, and the various components under the skin help make them tough. Some of these that you'll have to consider, like springs and tires, we'll cover in the second program when you can see how the Chevy Truck Facts book matches these components together. For now, I'm just going to explain how a few of the basic truck components work to handle all kinds of loads. The truck's backbone is the frame. All the other components depend on the frame's durability and strength for its load-carrying capabilities. It's made of high-strength steel. The way it's structured is called a ladder-type design. This is one of the reasons it's so durable, because the connectors, called cross members, provide extra support. Notice how the frame is depressed here. This is called a drop-center design. You can tell prospects one of the reasons Chevy trucks offer a comfortable lower cab step-in height is due to this design. Take a look at how these brackets grasp these frame rails so tightly. They're called alligator jaw brackets. They help prevent front-to-rear movement of the side rails. Next, let's look at what components contribute to the truck's ride. One of the major components that provides a smooth ride, regardless of road and load conditions, on the two-wheel drive Chevy pickup is the massive girder beam independent front suspension. What makes it independent? You can see how the wheel, spring, and shock on one side soaks up bumps without transferring the force or road shock to the other side. How does it do that? There are two steel control arms with friction-free coil springs attached to the outer ends of the girder beam. These are the components that allow the wheels to soak up those bumps independently. At the rear, Chevy's two-stage multi-leaf springs adjust automatically to provide the proper support for an empty cargo box or a full load. When the load is light, the springs provide a smooth ride. But as the load is increased, the springs flatten and additional leaves are brought into play. They provide progressively firmer load support while still offering a smooth ride. Okay, all these components work together to handle cargo weight. Of course, in real life, it's not always going to be so convenient that your prospect will know the weight of his cargo. He just may say, "I carry a bunch of cinder blocks." When this happens, you can turn to the Tables and Data section in the Chevy Truck Facts book to find lists of common cargoes and their weights. After you've determined the truck has the proper GVWR for the prospect, whether the truck will support the load, next you've got to figure out whether the truck has the power to move it. Let's look at the next level of information, power teams. For trucks, the basic power team combination will be engines, transmissions, and rear axle ratios. The proper combination can do the job it's supposed to do efficiently and effectively. The improper combination will produce an unhappy customer because the truck can't do the job it was bought for. Once again, knowing how much load the truck is going to carry will help you determine the kind of power team necessary to drive that truck. Let's begin this discussion with torque and horsepower. Torque gets the load rolling, and horsepower keeps it moving. For our purposes, we're going to define torque as the power to work. It means more than that, but that definition will do for now. The glossary has more detail. Anyhow, the amount of torque needed determines the power team that's best for your customer. Torque is expressed as foot-pounds. You'll see it written this way, but it's read as foot-pounds. For a more detailed explanation of what that means, look in the workbook glossary. You can even stop the program and look it up now if you want. For its full-size, light-duty pickups, Chevrolet offers 9 engine selections, gasoline and diesel. Figuring out the proper engine is fairly easy. As a rule of thumb, the larger the engine, the more horsepower there is and the more torque there is available. But figuring out the correct transmission isn't quite as obvious. It isn't all that difficult, though, once you understand the purpose of a transmission, whether it's a car or a truck.
From a standing start, the engine engages with the transmission in low gear to produce lots of torque, to overcome inertia and provide acceleration. Intermediate gear provides a little less torque, but builds speed. In certain Chevrolet transmissions, 2 or more intermediate gears provide greater torque and speed flexibility. In high gear, or final drive, the engine and transmission output speed is the same. Torque requirements are minimal, and the vehicle speed is at cruising. Should the vehicle encounter a steep hill, its speed would decrease. Increased torque would be required to climb it, and the transmission would shift to an intermediate gear to compensate. On a stretch of flat road, some transmissions have an available overdrive gear that allows the engine to turn fewer revolutions than the drive shaft. Overdrive results in better fuel economy and less engine noise.
Basically, the transmission has one function: to provide a set of gears that takes into account engine speed and road and load conditions, keeping the engine running smoothly and efficiently while providing enough torque to the rear wheels to move the load. Specifically, it determines the ratio between the number of times the engine turns and drive shaft turns. That provides the working force needed for any particular job. When you see a column of numbers like this, it tells you how many times the engine turns in relation to how many times the drive shaft turns. For our example, we're going to round off these numbers. When the engine turns more than the drive shaft, more force is transmitted. So this number tells you that in first gear, the engine is turning 4 times to turn the drive shaft once. It's transferring more power than in third gear, for instance, where the engine turns once to the drive shaft's 1 turn. Well, fine, you say, but how does that help me recommend the truck? Easy. When you've found that your prospect needs a truck for hauling heavy loads, you want to make sure there's enough power for the job. So you can look at the gear ratio for any transmission and tell how much working power or torque there's going to be in any gear. You'll look for a transmission with a very low or deep first gear. But when you see that the high gear is represented by a number less than 1, That tells you the drive shaft is turning more than the engine. In this case, the drive shaft is turning once for every 3/4 of a turn the engine makes. Another way of looking at it is that the engine is making 25% fewer revolutions per minute, making it 25% more efficient. That's called the overdrive gear, and it doesn't provide as much torque or working power as a lower gear. Who would want that? Easy again. When a truck, or a car for that matter, is cruising at steady highway speeds, it doesn't need as much energy to keep it moving, far less than getting it started. For a prospect who tells you high fuel mileage is more important than load carrying ability, you'd consider an overdrive transmission. Well, that's a basic overview of transmissions. Next, we'll cover rear axle ratios and their role in the power team. This may seem like a confusing bunch of numbers, but what do you really need to know about rear axle ratios? The basics are these. The lowest numerical ratio provides the driver with excellent fuel economy, but not a lot of load carrying power. The higher the numerical ratio, the more working power there is. Why? The numbers you see are ratios. The figure to the left of the colon refers to the number of revolutions of the drive shaft. The 1 refers to the number of revolutions made by the rear axle shafts or rear wheels. So in a ratio like 2.73 to 1, the drive shaft is revolving only 2.73 times to make the rear wheels revolve once. What does this mean to you? The numerically lower ratios offer more road speed, better fuel economy, but less torque. The numerically higher ratios offer more torque, but not as much high speed or fuel economy. With a numerically high work-oriented ratio like 4.56 to 1, we've got a hard-working truck like this one. A simple rule of thumb to remember is that when the rear axle ratio is numerically higher, there's more torque for low-end pulling power. The numerically lower ratios offer better fuel economy at highway speeds. But for actually figuring out how much working power or torque is going to go to the rear wheels, there's a simple formula that will help you determine which transmission might be the most ideal for your prospect. That formula is engine torque times gear ratio times rear axle ratio. Start with engine torque. Here, 240 represents a particular engine's torque output. Now take the first gear ratio of a 3-speed manual transmission. Here we'll use 3.5. Multiply these figures. Take the result, 840, and multiply that by 3.08, one of the available rear axle ratios. Round it off, this gives you 2,587. This is the amount, or foot-pounds of torque, at the rear wheels in first gear. Doing the same simple math with the same engine and rear axle ratio, but using the 4-speed manual transmission with deep low first gear, would show that this transmission would provide almost twice as much foot-pounds of torque to the rear wheels than the 3-speed manual in first gear. Using this simple formula, you can easily show your prospect why you're recommending a 4-speed manual rather than a 3-speed if he has a heavy load to get rolling. For those of you who have tried to pull away from a stoplight in third gear when you thought you were in first, there simply wasn't enough torque in that gear to get the rear wheels moving. This explains why you stalled the engine. As you might have guessed, it's time to answer a few more questions on the material we just covered. Take your time. Well, believe it or not, we've just covered the basics of truck knowledge. You've learned how to qualify a truck prospect. In the process, you've learned some basic truck terms like GVWR, 4x2, and 4x4. You've learned the basic differences between Chevrolet's most popular models and series. You've learned about some of the components that make the differences between those models and series. We've even discussed the basics of putting together power teams for different purposes. But most importantly, I hope you've seen that when you take truck knowledge and approach it one level at a time, it's not as difficult as you thought it was going to be. As long as you remember to let the truck knowledge build one level at a time, and that it all rests on properly qualifying the prospect, the base of the truck knowledge pyramid, you'll be several steps ahead of the game. Let me show you something. Whenever you look at the back of a dollar bill, and hey, isn't this what it's all about? Be reminded of the truck knowledge pyramid. and how by investing some time and effort in learning this new way to think about trucks, starting at the bottom with qualifying and moving on through models and series, components, power teams, it's all going to finally add up to the sale. And that's what's covered on the second side of this disc. We're going to show you how to actually build a truck using the Chevy Truck Facts Book. Before you look at that program, however, you should take some time. Become familiar with the basic truck terms and answer some questions in the first part of the Truck Basics Workbook. Remember, what you'll learn in the second program will build on this first, just like the pyramid.